The harsh December wind whipped through Logan International Airport's terminals, carrying with it the electric energy of thousands of students rushing home for winter break. Metal suitcase wheels clattered against tile floors, holiday music competed with flight announcements, and in the midst of this chaos, Sarah Chen was running late. Her dark hair had long escaped its messy bun, medical textbooks threatened to burst from her overstuffed backpack, and her heart pounded with each step toward gate B7. She'd sacrificed her morning routine, including her daily prayer for an extra 30 minutes of sleep after an all-night study session for her final anatomy exam. Final boarding call for Flighter 2547 to Chicago O'Hare, the announcement boomed overhead, each word a hammer against her racing pulse. Her phone buzzed again, the fifth message from Rachel since morning. Sarah could practically hear her best friend's concerned voice. Did you pray before leaving? You know how important it is, especially during holiday travel. Rachel, the perpetual voice of spiritual wisdom in Sarah's chaotic pre-med life, had tried to warn her last night during their call. Sarah, remember what happened to Jessica last December? She missed her connection in Denver and ended up stranded for 3 days. That was because of a blizzard. Sarah had dismissed her friend's concern. Besides, I've got TSA pre-check, my lucky pencil from the MECAT, and a window seat. What could go wrong? Now, as she watched the gate agent begin closing the door, Sarah's stomach dropped. She glanced at her phone's lock screen, a photo of her and Rachel from their freshman year orientation, both wearing crosses that Rachel had insisted they buy together. Her friend's words from countless conversations echoed in her mind. Prayer isn't a good luck charm, Sarah. It's preparation for whatever God has planned. But the gate agent looked up, her expression already apologetic. I'm sorry, miss. We've completed final boarding. Sarah slumped against the nearby window, watching her carefully planned schedule crumble. Outside, her plane began its slow back away from the gate, carrying with it her hopes of making it home in time for her little sister's winter concert. Her phone buzzed one final time. Rachel, again, something tells me you need to pray right now. Call me when you can. Looking at the message, Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. For the first time that morning, she closed them and did what she should have done hours ago. She prayed. Sarah hadn't always been this person, the one who rushed through prayers and treated faith like a backup plan. Growing up in Chicago's suburbs, she'd been the model daughter at their local Chinese church, leading youth group discussions and helping with Sunday school. Her parents, first-generation immigrants who'd built a successful restaurant business through hard work and unwavering faith, had raised her to believe that prayer was as essential as breathing. But medical school had a way of reshaping priorities. Between anatomy labs, biochemistry exams, and clinical rotations, Sarah's spiritual life had gradually been compressed into quick bedtime prayers and occasional Sunday live streams. Her Bible app's daily verses often went unread, buried under notifications from medical study groups and deadline reminders. Standing in the bustling terminal now, Sarah watched families hurry past, parents shepherding children with Mickey Mouse luggage, elderly couples moving unhurriedly despite the general chaos, and countless students like herself. Their laptops balanced precariously on carry-on bags as they tried to squeeze in last-minute studying. Her phone buzzed with a FaceTime call from Rachel. Sarah hesitated before answering, knowing exactly what her best friend's expression would be. You didn't pray this morning, did you? Rachel's concerned face filled the screen, her medical scrubs visible beneath her white coat. Unlike Sarah, Rachel had chosen to stay in California for medical school, maintaining her balance of faith and studies with seemingly effortless grace. I was running late, Sarah defended, watching a group of Christmas carolers move through the terminal, their voices rising above the airport's din. Not everyone can be as perfectly organized as you, Rach. Rachel's smile was gentle but knowing. Remember what Professor Martinez told us in freshman bio. Medicine requires precision, but healing requires faith. You're trying to do everything on your own again, aren't you? Sarah's silence was answer enough. She'd always admired and envied Rachel's ability to maintain her spiritual discipline despite the demands of medical school. While Sarah's prayer journal gathered dust, Rachel still woke at 5 a.m. for her daily devotional. When Sarah stressed over exams, Rachel would remind her to pray first, study second. Even their approaches to medicine differed. Sarah focused on the purely scientific aspects, while Rachel saw each patient interaction as an opportunity for spiritual care alongside physical healing. The winter travel season swirled around them in full force. Television screens throughout the terminal displayed weather warnings across the Midwest, and harried airline staff attempted to redirect passengers affected by cancellations. The air hummed with a mixture of holiday excitement and travel anxiety, punctuated by announcements in multiple languages and the distant sound of holiday music from the airport speakers. "I had a dream about you last night," Rachel continued, her voice taking on the serious tone Sarah recognized from their deeper conversations. "You were standing at a crossroads, and all your medical textbooks were scattered around you, but you couldn't read any of them until you picked up your Bible first." Sarah rolled her eyes, but something in her chest tightened. "You and your dreams, Rach. Not everything is a sign, you know." "Maybe not," Rachel conceded, adjusting her stethoscope. "But when was the last time you really listened for one? Mom always says that God speaks loudest when we're forced to be still. Maybe this delayed flight is your chance to listen." Looking around at the terminal that would now be her home for the next few hours, Sarah felt a strange mix of frustration and possibility. The Christmas decorations seemed to twinkle with new meaning, and even the chaos of holiday travel took on a different perspective. Perhaps Rachel was right. Maybe there was something to learn in this unwanted pause. "I've got to start rounds," Rachel said softly. "But Sarah, remember what we learned in Sunday school? Sometimes God's no to one prayer is actually a yes to something better. Just be open to it, okay?" As the call ended, Sarah found herself studying her reflection in the terminal's rain-streaked windows. The frazzled medical student looking back at her seemed far removed from the girl who'd once found such peace in prayer. When had she started seeing her faith as something that competed with her dreams rather than complemented them? The gate agent's fingers flew across her keyboard, her face brightening. "I can get you on the 2:45 p.m. flight to Chicago, Ms. Chen. It's actually a better aircraft, one of our new Dreamliners with the upgraded medical equipment on board." She paused, then added with a smile, "Sometimes delays are blessings in disguise." Sarah settled into the airport's interfaith chapel, one of the few quiet spaces she could find. As she sat in the peaceful silence, an elderly woman in a crisp white coat entered, her silver hair elegantly coiffed beneath a designer scarf. The woman's movements were deliberate, her presence commanding yet gentle. "Mind if I join you?" the woman asked, settling into the pew beside Sarah. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Mills. I couldn't help but notice your anatomy textbook earlier, Harrison's 21st edition." Sarah straightened, immediately recognizing the name. "Dr. Mills?" The Dr. Mills who pioneered the modified Mills-Sullivan technique for pediatric cardiac surgery. The older doctor's eyes twinkled. "The same. Though these days I'm more interested in pioneering ways to combine faith and medicine. Something tells me you might be wrestling with that balance yourself." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah found herself sharing everything with Dr. Mills: her struggles balancing medical school and spiritual life, her fear of being seen as less scientific if she embraced her faith openly, and her growing distance from the spiritual confidence she once had. "You know, Doctor," Mills said, pulling out her own well-worn Bible, "I almost lost my faith during my residency. Then one night I had a critical pediatric case. Everything went wrong. The child's heart wouldn't restart. Nothing in our protocols was working. In desperation, I prayed, right there in the OR, hands still inside this child's chest. The scrubbed nurses thought I'd lost my mind." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "The moment I finished praying, I felt guided to try an unconventional approach. That approach became what you know as the Mills-Sullivan technique. Prayer didn't replace medical knowledge, it enhanced it." Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement for Sarah's rescheduled flight. As they walked to the gate together, Dr. Mills shared stories of her 40-year career, each one a perfect blend of medical expertise and divine guidance. "Here's my card," Dr. Mills said as they reached the gate. "I'm actually heading to Chicago myself next month to give a lecture on spirituality and medicine. I'd love for you to attend." As Sarah boarded the plane, she felt lighter somehow, as if the delay had given her exactly what she needed. She settled into her seat, actually grateful for the missed connection that had led to this unexpected mentorship. The flight was halfway to Chicago when the first signs of trouble appeared. A flight attendant rushed past, her professional calm slightly frayed. Minutes later, the call came over the intercom: "If there are any medical professionals on board, please press your call button." Sarah's finger hovered over the button. She wasn't technically a medical professional yet, but Dr. Mills's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes God puts us in places for reasons we don't understand. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the button. As she made her way to the front of the plane, she did something she hadn't done in months before a medical situation. She prayed for guidance. The scene that awaited her would test everything she'd learned, both in medical school and in her conversation with Dr. Mills. A passenger lay slumped in his seat, his skin grey, while his terrified wife gripped his hand. The flight attendant looked at Sarah with desperate hope. "I'm a medical student," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Let me help." The airplane cabin seemed to shrink as Sarah knelt beside the unconscious passenger. Her training kicked in automatically: a BC assessment, airway, breathing, circulation. The man's pulse was weak and irregular, his breathing shallow. She couldn't help but notice he was about her father's age. "Sir, can you hear me?" Sarah checked his responsiveness while the flight attendant retrieved the plane's medical kit. No response. Rachel's voice echoed in her memory. "Prayer isn't just for emergencies, but it sure helps during them." Taking a quick breath, Sarah whispered a silent prayer while checking vital signs. "He has a history of heart problems," his wife explained, clutching a small pill bottle. "He took his medication this morning, but—" Sarah examined the bottle, her mind racing through her pharmacology lectures. Suddenly, Dr. Mills's earlier words clicked. Sometimes medical knowledge is the answer to a prayer. "Has he taken any other medications today?" Sarah asked, noting the drug interactions she'd just studied for finals. The wife mentioned an over-the-counter cold medicine, and Sarah's pulse quickened. This was the exact contraindication she'd learned about last week. The flight attendant returned with the medical kit and automated external defibrillator aid. Sarah had only used one in simulations, but her hands moved with surprising steadiness as she attached the pads. The automated voice began its instructions, but Sarah was already ahead of each step. "I need someone to time compressions," she called out. A young businessman volunteered, his Rolex perfect for the task. As Sarah began chest compressions, she remembered Rachel's persistent messages about divine timing. Was this why she'd missed her original flight? "The aid," advised a shock. "Clear," Sarah called out, just as she'd practiced in labs. The passenger's body jerked, and Sarah immediately resumed compressions. 1 minute passed. 2. Her arms ached, but she wouldn't stop. She'd learned in church that faith without works was dead. Right now, her faith was expressing itself through every compression. On the 3rd cycle, the man gasped. Color slowly returned to his face as his eyes fluttered open. The cabin erupted in applause, but Sarah barely heard it. She was too focused on checking his vital signs, which were steadily normalizing. "Thank you," his wife sobbed, gripping Sarah's hand. "Are you a doctor?" "Medical student," Sarah replied, still monitoring his pulse. "But I just happened to study this exact medication interaction yesterday." She didn't add that it had been a last-minute addition to her exam, one that had made her oversleep this morning. The flight attendants had radioed ahead, and emergency services would meet them at the gate. As Sarah returned to her seat, passengers reached out to squeeze her hand or pat her shoulder. The businessman with the Rolex insisted on taking her contact information. His company's charitable foundation supported medical students, and he wanted to nominate her for a scholarship. In the quiet aftermath, Sarah's hands shook as the adrenaline wore off. She pulled out her phone to find several missed texts from Rachel. "Had another dream about you. You're going to be exactly where you need to be today. God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't match our schedule." Sarah's vision blurred with tears as everything connected. The missed flight that put her in the chapel with Dr. Mills. The conversation that restored her confidence in combining faith and medicine. The coincidence of having just studied that specific drug interaction. Even the upgraded aircraft with its better medical equipment. The lead flight attendant approached with a satellite phone. "The passenger's cardiologist would like to speak with you about the intervention you performed. He says your quick recognition of the drug interaction likely saved his patient's life." As Sarah detailed the emergency response to the cardiologist, she could hear the respect in his voice. "You mentioned you're a medical student. Where are you studying?" "Boston University," she replied, adding after a moment's hesitation, "I was actually supposed to be on an earlier flight, but I missed it." "Well, someone up there was looking out for my patient today," the cardiologist said. Sometimes missed connections are divine interventions. Looking out the window at the sunset painting the clouds in brilliant golds and purples, Sarah remembered all the times she'd rushed through her prayers, seeing them as interruptions to her medical studies. Now she understood prayer hadn't just prepared her spiritually for this moment, it had been preparing her all along, through every study session, every exam, every seemingly random addition to the curriculum. The flight's captain came to personally thank her before landing, insisting on upgrading her to first class for her return flight to Boston. But the real reward was the message she sent to Rachel. "Remember how you said God speaks loudest when we're forced to be still? I finally listened. Call me when you can. I have an amazing story to tell you about divine timing and drug interactions. 2 weeks later. Sarah wheeled her carry-on through Boston's Logan Airport for her return flight. This time she arrived 2 hours early, having woken at dawn for her morning prayers and devotional reading. The same terminal that had witnessed her frantic rush now saw a different Sarah Chen, one who moved with purpose rather than panic. Her phone buzzed with a text from the passenger she'd helped save. His wife had been sending her daily updates, and yesterday's message included a photo of him back home, surrounded by grandchildren opening early Christmas presents. "God sent us an angel in medical school," the wife had written. Sarah smiled, remembering Dr. Mills's words about divine appointments. The elderly surgeon had already become an integral part of her life, their weekly mentoring calls covering everything from surgical techniques to spiritual disciplines. Next month, Sarah would be presenting alongside her at the conference on spirituality and medicine. "There's my prayer warrior." Rachel's voice rang out across the terminal. Her best friend had flown in to spend the remainder of break with Sarah's family, a tradition they'd maintained since undergraduate years. The two embraced, and Rachel pulled back to study Sarah's face. "Something's different about you. You're glowing." "I finally understand what you meant about divine timing," Sarah replied as they walked toward baggage claim. "Remember how I used to say I didn't have time for morning devotionals? Now they're the most productive part of my day." Her new routine had transformed her approach to medical school. Each morning began with prayer and scripture reading, followed by a brief meditation on how she could serve others through her medical training. Her anatomy professor had noticed the change, commenting on how her patient interactions during clinical rotations had become more empathetic and intuitive. "So tell me more about this mentorship program you're starting," Rachel said as they loaded their bags into the Uber. Sarah's eyes lit up. "Dr. Mills helped me design it. We're calling it Healing Hearts. It pairs medical students with spiritual mentors in their specialty. The dean loves the idea, especially after what happened on the flight. We're launching next semester with 30 students already signed up." The program had grown from Sarah's realization that many of her classmates struggled with the same spiritual medical balance she had. During study breaks, more students were now joining her in the medical school's small chapel, finding that prayer provided clarity for their medical studies rather than competing with them. The businessman from the flight, Mr. Patterson, his foundation is funding scholarships for students who demonstrate excellence in holistic patient care, Sarah continued. "But the best part, the patient I helped save is on the board of directors at Chicago Memorial. They're creating a new rotation in spiritual care and emergency medicine. Guess who they want as their first student resident?" Rachel squeezed her hand. "See what happens when you pray before traveling." Sarah laughed, but her eyes were serious. "It's not just about the prayer before travel anymore, Rach. It's about understanding that every moment, even the delayed flights and missed connections, is an opportunity to serve God through medicine." Her phone buzzed again, an email from Dr. Mills containing their presentation outline for the upcoming conference. The title slide read, "Divine Timing in Medical Emergencies, a Case Study in Faith-Integrated Healthcare." "You know what's amazing," Sarah said, showing Rachel the email. 3 months ago, I was trying to keep my faith and my medical career in separate compartments. Now I'm helping design a curriculum to integrate them." Rachel nodded, her eyes tearing up. "Sometimes the best answers to prayer aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they're the ones that change our whole journey." As their car wound through Boston streets, Sarah thought about the scared, rushed medical student she'd been just weeks ago. That version of herself had seen prayer as something to fit in between study sessions. Now she understood prayer wasn't just preparation for the journey, it was the foundation that made the journey possible. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the podium of the National Conference on Faith and Medicine, her presentation slides showing a flight path overlaid with Bible verses. The audience, a mix of medical professionals, students, and spiritual leaders, listened intently as she shared her story. "We often think of prayer as a ritual, something to check off our to-do lists before traveling," she said, glancing at Rachel in the front row. "But that December day taught me that prayer isn't just about asking for safe travels. It's about preparing our hearts for divine appointments we never saw coming." The screen behind her showed the statistics. Since implementing the Healing Hearts program, student burnout rates had decreased by 40%. Patient satisfaction scores for participating students had risen significantly, and the program was being adopted by 3 other medical schools. That missed flight wasn't a delay, it was an appointment. That medical emergency wasn't a coincidence, it was a calling. And my rushed morning without prayer wasn't a mistake, it was a lesson I needed to learn. Sarah held up her new white coat, embroidered with both her name and a small cross. "Now, before every hospital shift, every exam, and yes, every flight, I take time to pray. Not because it's a good luck charm, but because it aligns my heart with God's timing." She smiled at Dr. Mills, who nodded encouragingly from her seat. "To my fellow students watching this, your travel plans this December might not go as scheduled. But remember, sometimes a missed connection can lead to your greatest calling." Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories of faith and medicine. Share your own prayer experiences in the comments below and join our Healing Hearts community for weekly inspiration. Remember, the most important preparation for any journey isn't in your suitcase, it's in your prayer. As the applause filled the auditorium, Sarah touched the cross necklace Rachel had given her years ago. Her journey had come full circle, but in many ways it was just beginning.